the chipped tooth metaphor, Buddhist wisdom for midnight overthinking, the architecture of nocturnal panic and the myth of the controlled mind. You have just reached over to click off the bedside lamp, settling your weight into the mattress, and you immediately initiate that familiar involuntary calculation that every responsible, overextended adult executes in the dark. You glance at the glowing digits of the clock and begin to compute the precise number of minutes and hours remaining before your morning alarm rings, mapping out the biological deficit you will have to navigate tomorrow if you manage to drop into unconsciousness within the next 5 minutes. You have just checked your mental ledger, locked your posture into a horizontal position, and opened the door to a highly sophisticated, unprompted retrospective of your entire existence. This is the nightly symposium of overthinking that seems to automatically install itself in your consciousness the moment you cross the threshold of adulthood. Or perhaps it established its grip when your household expanded with children, when you accepted that high-pressure promotion, or when you realized that your investment portfolios and retirement accounts are not behaving with the geometric perfection promised by those pristine financial planning columns you routinely scan. Your physical framework is genuinely exhausted. Your eyelids carry the heavy pressure of a long day of logistics, but your cognitive apparatus has decided that this quiet sanctuary is the absolute pinnacle of time to run an unsparing audit of your history. Your mind begins its review by resurrecting a minor refinancing decision you made regarding your mortgage back in the late 2000s. Shifts seamlessly into analyzing whether you should alter your retirement allocations, and culminates in an anxious deliberation over whether you selected the correct medical insurance tier during the recent open enrollment period. You are now experiencing the exact structural movement of consciousness that contemplative practitioners and forest ascetics have been documenting across the silent expanses of the world for over 2,500 years. The ancient monks, of course, enjoyed a distinct advantage in that they never had to worry about financing a multi-year university tuition or determining if a localized ache in a knee joint required a visit to a specialist. They were remarkably insulated from property taxes, interest rates, and digital notifications. Yet right now, as you watch the ceiling in the dark, you are experiencing an intimate, customized manifestation of what the ancient text traditions called dukkha, an existential friction or suffering. This is not the grand, theatrical tragedy depicted in classic literature, but rather the subtle, persistent brand of internal stress that arises when an unmanaged mind transforms into a highly judgmental accountant, obsessively reviewing the ledger of your life choices. The unique approach of Buddhism stands apart from other major world traditions in a fundamental way. While many religions center around belief in God, souls, or sacred texts, Buddhism takes a completely different path. The Buddha did not ask his followers to have faith in things they could not verify. Instead, he invited them to explore their own experience, to see for themselves the nature of reality. When the Buddha was asked metaphysical questions about God, the afterlife, or the beginning of the universe, he often remained silent or responded with a story or question that redirected attention to the present moment. He recognized that human speculation regarding things beyond direct perception was not only futile, but actively counterproductive to the urgent work of dismantling immediate psychological suffering. To understand why the mind exhibits this stubborn, repetitive behavior, consider the physical metaphor of the chipped tooth. If you break a tooth, even slightly, a fascinating biological and psychological phenomenon occurs. Your tongue will repeatedly, almost pathologically, return to the sharp edge. It will slide across the rough fracture dozens, if not hundreds of times an hour. This movement is entirely involuntary. You do not issue a conscious command from the prefrontal cortex saying to your tongue to go inspect the fracture. The tongue moves on its own instinctual accord. It returns to the chipped tooth because the somatic wisdom of the body recognizes an interruption in the natural order, harmony, and polish of the physical form. It returns to the site of the break because it is seeking smoothness, completeness, and resolution. It is saying, in a language of direct sensation, that something here is altered, incomplete and unresolved. Your mind behaves exactly the same way when a relationship ends abruptly, when words are left unsaid, or when a career choice remains raw and jagged. The mental phantom that appears in your thoughts is not a random psychological glitch or a sign that you are losing your competence. Your attention keeps returning to the memory of that choice or that person because, like the tongue returning to the chipped tooth, your internal ecosystem recognizes that something within your world remains fractured, unintegrated, or incomplete. Your persistent thoughts are not the problem. They are your mind's unrefined, desperate attempt at a solution. They are the psychic tongue continually testing the boundaries of the wound, trying to heal it through the only medium it knows: repetitive representation and internal narration. The foundational error we commit when confronted with obsessive thoughts is engaging in an internal war of attrition. We operate under the delusion that the conscious ego possesses the authority to dictate what the subconscious mind is allowed to process. We believe that if we just fight hard enough, push the memory away with enough force, or distract ourselves with enough intensity, the thoughts will simply vanish into the void. This is the great illusion of control. In the standard paradigm of modern psychological struggle, we treat the mind as a house that can be cleansed of unwanted guests through sheer force of will. But what we consistently fail to realize is that the very act of pushing away an internal phenomenon requires a massive investment of psychological energy. To consciously resist a thought, you must constantly maintain an internal representation of the very thing you are trying to avoid. You must keep the target in focus to ensure it remains expelled. Thus, the act of suppression becomes the ultimate form of fixation, the myth of the controlled mind, and the illusion of the core self. Buddhism turns this competitive approach completely on its head through the foundational practices of vipassana, which means clear seeing, and samatha, which represents tranquility. Rather than attempting to force the mental landscape to conform to an idealized state of blankness, these traditions instruct the practitioner to change their relationship to the thought itself. The problem is never the presence of the thought. The problem is the violent contraction of resistance that occurs around it. What you fight, you invest with your own personal power. What you resist persists because it utilizes the energy of your resistance to fuel its own longevity. What you meet with pure, spacious, non-judgmental awareness naturally exhausts its karmic fuel and transforms. To comprehend the sheer volume of energy that these Latinite phantoms consume, we must examine how the mind state becomes saturated by conditioned patterns. When you are caught in an obsessive loop about your choices, your mind is not experiencing a static state. It is producing a high-speed, self-reinforcing wheel of mental formations. Every time the image of a perceived failure arises, it triggers a subtle cascade of physical chemistry, a tightening of the solar plexus, a subtle elevation of the heart rate, a drop in the temperature of the hands. The ego, misinterpreting these bodily signals as definitive proof of the external situation's supreme importance, immediately constructs a narrative to justify the physical discomfort. The narrative usually takes the form of endless questions about why things happened as they did, whether we made the correct transitions, or if a completely different life trajectory was possible. This narrative loop acts as a direct injection of fuel into the cognitive fire. The story generates more emotion, the emotion intensifies the physical sensations. The intense physical sensations demand more stories to explain them. Before long, your entire consciousness is saturated. You are no longer living in reality. You are living inside a highly combustible, self-contained simulator of the past or an imaginary future. You are a prisoner in a cell where the bars are made of your own unexamined interpretations. The Buddha's insight was that you can break these chains at any point. You don't have to follow the thought train all the way to its final destination of doom. You can just notice the arrival of the thought and decline to step on board. This brings us to the profound, deeply practical Buddhist doctrine of anatta, or non-self. While this concept is frequently treated as an abstract piece of mysticism, it functions as an immediate tool for emotional liberation. When you are stuck awake, the judgmental, critical voice in your head that is currently listing every single way you have fallen short of your goals is not your true identity. It is more like a talk radio station that somehow got stuck on the channel of your perceived shortcomings. Think about it logically. You are capable of consciously observing these thoughts, which means you cannot be the thoughts themselves. You are the awareness behind them. You are the empty space of the theater, not the chaotic movie flashing across the white screen. And this particular movie, centered around Latinite regret, is an illusion that possesses no permanent authority over your being. The Four Noble Truths of the Sleep-Deprived Adult. To unpack this experience without relying on modern commercial self-help cliches or expensive digital apps, we can look straight through the diagnostic framework of the Four Noble Truths, which function essentially as a timeless blueprint for why the human mind malfunctions at bedtime and how to realign it without force. The first noble truth asserts the absolute universality of dissatisfaction, or dukkha. As you are currently experiencing it, this truth is the literal answer to why you are wide awake at midnight, pondering if you should have invested differently or worked harder. The Buddha noticed that even when our relative circumstances are remarkably stable, the human mind will instinctively find a method to generate a crisis. If the immediate environment is completely clear of threats, it will readily access the archives of memory or the wilderness of the future to manufacture an artificial problem. The second noble truth locates the precise engine of this dissatisfaction within the mechanics of attachment and craving. In your immediate experience, this manifests as a rigid, uncompromising attachment to the narrative that you should have your entire existential trajectory completely organized, polished, and finalized by this stage of your adulthood. The reality of human existence is that no one possesses a finalized blueprint. Your mind, in this exact second, is fiercely attached to the concept that your physical form must be unconscious right now. And this very attachment is the precise friction that is keeping your nervous system in a state of high alert vigilance. It behaves exactly like an individual, trying to consciously lower their own blood pressure through sheer force of will. The more intensely you focus on the metric, the more your adrenaline rises, ensuring that the target remains completely out of reach. The third noble truth delivers the liberating insight that this pattern of suffering can be completely dissolved. It does not require you to purchase specialized audio tracks or invest in commercial wellness gadgets. The exit path from your current insomnia cannot be reached through the medium of more thinking. You have been applying intense analytical thinking to your life for several decades now, and it has systematically delivered you to this exact horizontal coordinate. Lying in bed, thinking about your thoughts, and auditing your anxiety. To break the loop, you must abandon the intellect entirely and pivot to a completely alternative dimension of your being. The fourth noble truth outlines the practical methodology for this liberation through the development of right mindfulness, which means being aware of what is actually happening in your physical space as opposed to what your mind claims is happening on the screen of your imagination. Let us separate these two dimensions with absolute clarity. If you strip away all interpretation, what is the raw reality of this moment? You are resting horizontally on a soft surface. Your respiratory system is expanding and contracting automatically. Your physical form is entirely safe from immediate environmental hazards. That is the absolute sum total of reality in this room. What, however, is your mind claiming is occurring? It is screaming that your upcoming workday is completely ruined. Your biological health is in a state of permanent decline. Your family is navigating towards structural failure, and you are hopelessly behind on every professional and financial benchmark. The ancient texts emphasize that the vast majority of human psychological suffering is generated by this continuous time travel of the intellect, the habit of leaving the safe harbor of the present moment to dwell either in the unalterable archives of the past or the completely imaginary territory of the future. Deconstructing the 5 hindrances of the night shift. To systematically dismantle this midnight traffic jam, we must deploy the precise taxonomy of Buddhist psychology, specifically looking through the framework of the 5 hindrances to peace of mind. These are not moral failures or signs that you are bad at being human. They are the natural operational bugs in the software of human consciousness when it is left unsupervised. The first hindrance is sensual desire. which in your current horizontal state manifests as a desperate, aggressive craving for reality to be different than it is specifically. The intense craving to be unconscious right now, or the craving for your financial spreadsheets to be magically resolved. The second is ill will or aversion, the white-hot frustration and resentment directed toward the fact that you are awake, the anger targeted at your own racing thoughts, or the envy directed toward anyone else who is sleeping peacefully. The third hindrance is sloth and torpor, that heavy, stagnant, and foggy biological state that is not quite deep sleep, but makes your cognitive processes feel as though they are wading through thick mud, trapping you in a state of sluggish inertia. This state behaves exactly like psychic quicksand. The more your intellect tries to think its way out of the fog, the more exhausted and ensnared you become. This is disrupted periodically by explosions of the fourth hindrance, restlessness and worry, the exact hyperactive state of nervous electricity you are currently navigating, where the mind behaves like a frantic mammalian organism trapped in a cage, bouncing wildly from your household expenses to a weird mechanical sound your vehicle executed during the afternoon commute. Finally, the fifth hindrance materializes, absolute, paralyzing doubt. This hindrance does not simply question your immediate sleep strategy. It targets the structural integrity of your entire life path. It whispers in the dark about whether you selected the correct professional trajectory, whether you are an adequate parent, or whether you have permanently ruined your financial horizon through past historical errors. The radical approach of Buddhist psychology is never to attempt to fight or violently suppress these hindrances. Engaging in a direct battle with restlessness or doubt is equivalent to trying to arm wrestle your own shadow. The very act of fighting invests the shadow with your own life force, deepens your exhaustion, and guarantees your continued confinement. The path of liberation requires you to simply acknowledge their presence with an objective, spacious neutrality. You breathe into the space and recognize them like old acquaintances arriving at an uninvited gathering. When you name them, they lose some of their power. They are just mental weather patterns, not permanent residents of your soul. Consider the immense volume of metabolic and psychological energy you are currently wasting by actively fighting reality. You are wide awake at 3 in the morning. That is the absolute, unvarnished fact of your existence in this second. All the cognitive energy you are utilizing to scream at this fact could power a small domestic grid. What would occur if you simply stopped fighting? What if you leaned back into the mattress and granted this moment absolute permission to be a wide-awake moment? The second arrow and the mechanics of proliferation. The Buddha discovered that most of our suffering comes from what he called the second arrow. The first arrow is the actual circumstance. You are currently awake when you prefer to be asleep. This is an unpleasant sensory condition, but it is entirely workable. The second arrow is the massive quiver of emotional commentary that your mind immediately fires into the wound. This is an absolute disaster. Tomorrow my performance will utterly fail. My health is actively collapsing. I am systematically failing at managing my life. You have absolutely no control over the first arrow. The biological alertness is already present, based on a complex web of past causes and conditions. But the second arrow, the entire theatrical production of Midnight Doom, is completely optional. You can voluntarily choose to stop shooting yourself. In the ancient text traditions, this secondary explosion of conceptual elaboration is known as papanka, or mental proliferation. Papanka is the automated operational habit of the untrained mind that takes a singular, neutral sensory input and warmth and instantaneously expands it into an epic, multi-layered narrative drama of absolute destruction. A simple sensation of physical wakefulness becomes a declaration of insomnia, which becomes a prophecy of career failure, which becomes a fear of financial destitution. This entire catastrophic chain of logic occurs within a fraction of a second, completely hijacking your nervous system and plunging your biological form into a state of acute adrenaline-driven panic. The masterclass instruction from the Zen forest tradition is to interrupt the chain at the very first link. You must learn to treat your intrusive thoughts exactly like those automated telemarketing communications that continuously flood your smartphone. When your device vibrates with an incoming call from an unverified source, You do not enter a state of deep existential despair. You do not sit on the edge of your seat arguing with the digital voice. You glance at the screen, recognize that it is a hollow data string, and you simply allow the device to ring in the background until the automated mechanism exhausts its cycle and disconnects. Your mind's late-night anxious thoughts are identical to those spam communications. They look important until you actually read them. Let the phone ring in the background of your awareness while you remain grounded in the space of the pure witness. Somatic grounding and the architecture of the chariot. To dismantle the power of these midnight phantoms, the practitioner must leave the arena of intellectual analysis and enter the pure laboratory of the physical body. You cannot think your way out of an obsessive thinking loop. Attempting to use the intellect to solve an intellectual obsession is like attempting to wash blood away with blood. It only deepens the stain. The absolute turning point in the practice of liberation is the radical shift from the narrative dimension of the mind to the somatic dimension of the body. This requires you to execute the great somatic shift. Turn your entire focus directly down into the physical geography of your body and ask yourself where this anxiety is living in your flesh right now. Scan your body with microscopic precision until you locate the visceral contraction. Look for the tight, suffocating knot directly over your anatomical heart, the hollow, nauseating fluttering in the pit of your stomach, the hot constriction around your throat, or the cold, rigid armoring across your jaw and shoulders. Once you locate the physical coordinates of the emotion, zoom in on it with absolute non-judgmental curiosity. Investigate the raw properties of the sensation as if you were a scientist discovering a new biological specimen. What are its exact dimensions? Does it have a clear shape, or are its boundaries fluid? Is it heavy, cold, sharp, or vibrating with high-frequency electricity? Once you have mapped its physical architecture, deploy the practice of radical non-resistant inhabitation. Breathe directly into the absolute center of the physical knot, granting it absolute unconditional permission to exist within your body. Say to that contraction of pain, through the language of pure presence, that it is allowed to be here. To break the power of this identity, we can look through the classic Buddhist analytical metaphor of the chariot. If you look at a fully assembled chariot, your mind automatically applies the solid, monolithic label of chariot. But if you begin to systematically dismantle the vehicle, removing the heavy iron wheels, detaching the wooden axle, sliding out the floorboards, and stripping away the leather harness, where precisely does the entity known as the chariot reside? Does it live in the axle? Is it inherent in the spokes of the wheels? Is it hidden within the chassis? You discover that there is no solid, independent substance known as a chariot, existing separate from the temporary arrangement of its constituent components. The label is simply a convenient linguistic shorthand for a transient configuration of parts. Your modern identity as a stressed, anxious adult or a permanent insomniac operates under the exact same laws of empty aggregation. When you lie in bed feeling overwhelmed, your mind treats the condition as a solid, permanent block of stone that has crushed your identity. But if you use the scalpel of mindfulness to deconstruct the experience into its raw components, you discover that the insomnia is completely empty of solid, independent existence. It is composed of a collection of changing physical pixels, a series of brief internal acoustic loops, and a localized pattern of somatic heat or biological pressure in your chest and solar plexus. None of these parts are solid, none of them are permanent, and none of them are inherently you. They are simply a temporary constellation of conditions moving through the open sky of your awareness. Dependent origination and the universal web of interdependence. This brings us directly to the foundational cosmic architecture known as Paticcasamuppada, or dependent origination. This law asserts that absolutely nothing in the universe arises in isolation. Everything that manifests in your internal or external world does so in structural dependence upon a vast, intricate web of prior causes and conditions. Your current inability to drop into sleep is not a personalized punishment delivered by an angry cosmos, nor is it proof of an intrinsic psychological malfunction. It is the natural, mathematical result of a specific chain of links. Your evening interface with a digital screen, the lingering chemical presence of that late afternoon caffeine choice, the ambient conversational friction from a family interaction, the unconscious existential pressure of watching your family age, and the structural conditioning of an economic system that equates rest with worth. All these conditions are intersecting in this exact second to produce the physical phenomenon of wakefulness. When you view your sleeplessness through the spacious lens of dependent origination, you instantly strip the experience of its toxic, personalized sting. You cease to scream at the mirror, and you begin to view your mind with a deep, scientific compassion. You recognize that if you place a highly sensitive human organism within a hyper-accelerated, technologically saturated, and economically demanding environment, the natural, logical result will occasionally be a midnight elevation of the nervous system. The mind is simply running its evolutionary survival software, searching for threats in the dark because it has been overstimulated during the day. Inside this spacious understanding, you can choose to take refuge in what the contemplative traditions call the Sangha, the universal community of practitioners. You must recognize that as you lie awake staring at the geometry of your bedroom, you are not an isolated casualty floating in a void. In this exact second, countless adults of your exact age group, your exact professional tier, and your exact demographic are wide awake across the planet. They are staring at their own ceilings, executed by the exact same calculations, tracking the exact same expense metrics, and wrestling with the exact same inner critics. You are involuntarily participating in a massive, global, and ancient community of the wide awake. There is a deep, unshakable comfort hidden within this realization. Your isolation dissolves. You are no longer a solitary person fighting a private psychological disease. You are a living thread in the vast shared tapestry of the human condition. The illusion of achievement and the art of non-striving. We live within a global culture that is profoundly intoxicated by the mythology of achievement, ambition, and continuous self-improvement. From early childhood, we are systematically conditioned to measure the absolute value of a human life exclusively by its external productivity, its linear progress, and its accumulation of goals. We are trained to become permanent future dwellers, treating the immediate present moment merely as a functional stepping stone, a necessary logistical inconvenience that we must endure to reach a highly idealized destination in the future. This hyper-ambitious conditioning produces an exceptionally common psychological profile. The high-achieving professional who possesses a magnificent 5-year plan, a rigorous productivity system, and a trail of massive professional victories, yet carries a deep, pervasive sense of internal hollow numbness. They reach the peak of the mountain they have spent a decade climbing, stand at the summit, and look around only to be ambushed by a terrifying whisper of consciousness, asking if this is absolutely all there is. Zen addresses this cultural hypnosis with an incredibly sharp, counterintuitive wisdom. If a high-powered, goal-oriented individual were to sit before a Zen master, proudly mapping out their complex strategies for future success, the master would not praise their ambition. They would look them straight in the eyes and ask a deeply grounding, simple question. With all this meticulous planning, all this intense striving, and all this continuous achieving, tell me, when exactly do you intend to actually live? When was the last time you fully, completely experienced the drinking of a single cup of tea without your mind secretly sprinting ahead to the next corporate meeting, the next email, or the next project? Zen points to a foundational, inescapable law of reality. Life only ever occurs right now. The future is nothing more than a conceptual phantom and imaginary mental simulation that can only ever be experienced when it arrives as the present moment. If you train your mind to become an expert in postponing its aliveness until a specific set of future conditions is met, you will remain a psychological beggar for your entire existence. Even if you achieve every single goal on your checklist, your conditioned habit of striving will automatically reactivate, pulling you out of the new present and projecting your happiness onto the next distant horizon. To ground these insights into an immediate behavioral strategy, tonight you must completely abandon the concept of practicing mindfulness to achieve sleep. Approaching meditation as a sophisticated, covert weapon designed to force your physical form into a state of unconsciousness is a total betrayal of the practice, and your ego will immediately recognize the manipulation, generating a secondary layer of performance anxiety. You must practice the art of wishlessness, which means the radical abandonment of any agenda for self-improvement or outcome optimization for the remainder of this night. You look at the clock and say to your own mind that you completely release the requirement to sleep tonight. If your eyes remain open until the arrival of the dawn, it is completely workable. You are here simply to rest your physical framework horizontally, breathe with absolute presence, and befriend the current reality of your consciousness exactly as it is. The myth of the Creator and the primordial raft of oneness. Buddhism stands apart from other major world traditions in how it repositions the entire concept of the divine and the absolute. Many historical religions construct a vast, dualistic gap between a supreme creator deity out there in the heavens and a fragile human creature down here in the dirt. This architecture inherently fosters a psychology of dependency, where liberation is viewed as an externalized transaction or reward, granted by a celestial judge in exchange for proper belief or moral compliance. The Buddha systematically dismantled this dualistic vertical hierarchy, asserting that the search for an external creator God is ultimately an unhelpful distraction from the empirical reality of your own mind stream. This non-theistic approach is beautifully illuminated by the ancient Hawaiian philosophical text framework known as the world of GGY, the absolute dimension of the mutual interpenetration of all particulars. This framework utilizes the grand cosmological metaphor of Indra's net to map the true nature of reality. Imagine an infinite cosmic web that stretches across the entire universe in every direction. At every single intersection of this web sits a flawless, multifaceted jewel. Because the surface of each jewel is perfectly polished, it reflects not only every other jewel on the entire net, but also the reflections within those jewels, stretching into an infinite mirror play of total interdependence. In this integrated universe, there is absolutely no obstruction, no separation, and no distance between one event and any other event in the cosmos. Every single particular thing contains, implies, and depends upon all other particular things, past, present, and future. The entire universe depends upon you for its precise manifestation in this moment, just as you depend entirely upon the weight of the entire universe to draw a single breath. Separation is an optical illusion created by the limitations of our conceptual thinking. We appear separate only on the surface, like individual islands dotting an ocean, completely oblivious to the fact that beneath the waterline, they are all connected to a single, continuous oceanic crust. The Buddha often used the metaphor of a raft to describe his teachings. You use the raft to cross the turbulent river of suffering, but you don't carry the raft on your head once you reach the other shore. Many religious seekers become so pathologically attached to the external forms of their religion, the rituals, the dogmas, the institutions, that they spend their entire existence living on the raft, going back and forth across the river endlessly, completely missing the true destination, which is absolute spiritual freedom. The goal of Zen is to use the raft to cross the river of your overthinking, step out onto the solid ground of the present moment, and leave the raft behind. You do not need an external celestial benefactor to unlock the door of your prison. You simply need to realize that the door has never been locked. The spatial highway and the stance of the hill witness. An untrained mind experiences life exclusively through the narrow beam of attention, which functions exactly like a flashlight in a pitch-black room. Whichever object the beam hits becomes your entire immediate reality. If the flashlight beam hits a terrifying memory of financial vulnerability, your entire universe becomes financial vulnerability. If it hits an anxious fantasy of future physical decline, your entire world transforms into physical decline. The practice of liberation is the process of realizing that you are not the flashlight beam. You are the vast, open room itself, which contains both the flashlight and the objects it illuminates. To reinforce this alignment during moments of high-velocity late-night cognitive traffic, visualize your individual consciousness as a quiet, elevated hill, overlooking a massive multi-lane metropolitan highway. The intrusive thoughts, the sudden memories, and the catastrophic scenarios that your mind is continuously generating are simply individual vehicles traveling down the blacktop below. An untrained individual behaves exactly like someone who routinely runs down onto the dangerous concrete of the highway, attempting to chase down specific high-speed sports cars, jump onto the bumpers of moving semi-trucks, or physically wrestle a massive delivery vehicle to a complete standstill. They are repeatedly run over, chemically battered, and utterly exhausted by the traffic. The masterclass instruction from the Zen forest tradition is simple. Stay on the quiet hill. Let the traffic move as it will. A thought representing a highly charged professional worry drives. By you look at it from the hill, note its presence, and allow it to pass. A heavy, dark vehicle representing an intense existential anxiety drives by. You do not run out to block it. You do not scream at the driver. You simply track its headlights until it disappears over the distant horizon. The highway has a structural right to exist, and the traffic has an evolutionary right to move. You do not need to build a massive concrete wall to block the road, nor do you need to clear the highway of cars to experience peace. Your only responsibility is to maintain your seat on the quiet hill of your own awareness, letting the traffic pass through your space without allowing it to hijack your identity for a single frame. The wabi-sabi soul and the gilding of human scars, one of the most profound, culturally visible expressions of the Zen mindset, is the way it completely revolutionized the landscape of traditional aesthetics through the philosophy of wabi-sabi, deep, quiet appreciation of that which is incomplete, irregular, weathered, and transient. This philosophy is beautifully embodied in the traditional Japanese art of kintsugi, which translates literally as golden joinery. When a highly prized ceramic tea bowl falls and shatters on the floor, a conventional craftsman will attempt to discard it or repair it using clear, invisible adhesive, trying desperately to mask the fracture and restore the illusion of flawless perfection. A Zen craftsman handles the disaster in a completely different manner. They mix liquid lacquer with genuine pulverized gold and use this brilliant metallic paste to bind the broken shards back together. The result is an object that does not hide its trauma. The gold lines actively highlight the fractures, transforming the history of the break into the most beautiful, valuable component of the vessel. The bowl is treasured far more because it was broken, not despite it. This is a profound living lesson for the human psyche. Most of us spend our lives trying to hide our emotional fractures, masking our vulnerabilities, and pretending to be flawless, symmetrical structures of success. We tout our past failures, our broken relationships, and our corporate missteps as deep sources of shame that must be hidden from the sight of the world. Zen invites you to practice kintsugi on your own soul, to stop treating your past heartbreaks and your structural vulnerabilities as sources of shame, and instead gild them with the gold of kind, spacious awareness. Your scars are not flaws to be hidden. They are the precise coordinates where history has touched you, rendering you uniquely beautiful, resilient, and real. You are not a damaged object that needs to be thrown away or forced back into an artificial shape. You are a magnificent work of living art whose value is amplified by the very trials you have navigated. When you stand in the dark embracing your own broken edges with compassion, the tyranny of the inner critic dissolves, and you discover a deep, unshakable self-acceptance that no external judgment can ever diminish. The digital Zen master, and the reclaiming of the attention field. As we bring the profound insights of ancient Zen Buddhism out of the quiet forest monasteries of the past and into the hyper-accelerated reality of the 21st century, we encounter a landscape of psychological friction that the ancient masters could never have physically imagined. We live in an era characterized by the systematic, algorithmic fragmentation of human attention through digital distraction. The modern individual exists in a state of chronic low-grade hypnosis, completely mediated by digital interfaces. The constant fragmentation of our attention is not a harmless logistical convenience. It is a radical psychological crisis that is actively training the mind to become completely intolerant of silence, space, and the unforced tempo of the present moment. The instant a brief gap emerges in the day while waiting in a line, riding in an elevator, or sitting in bed, a wave of subtle, unconscious anxiety rises within the nervous system. The ego, terrified of encountering the spacious void of its own unconditioned presence, automatically reaches for the pocket device to anesthetize the discomfort with a fresh hit of digital dopamine. A modern Zen approach to this crisis does not involve a naive, moralistic demonization of technology. It invites you to treat your smartphone as the ultimate, high-alert Zen master sitting right in your pocket. The next time you experience the automated, compulsive urge to reach for your phone in the dark, you must execute the protocol of the conscious pause. Before your hand physically touches the device, freeze the frame of your behavior and turn the light of your awareness 180 degrees inward upon your own organism. Ask yourself, what exactly is the driving force behind this physical compulsion in this precise second? What is the subterranean emotion that I am attempting to escape? Look closely beneath the surface of the physical urge. You will almost always discover a hidden pocket of raw psychological friction, a sudden wave of boredom, a sense of creative inadequacy, an ambient undercurrent of loneliness, or a vague running anxiety that you are missing out on something better somewhere else. By bringing kind, non-judgmental awareness to the compulsion, you instantly break its automated power over your nervous system, reclaiming the vast territory of your own attention. Somatic alchemy and the dissolution of emotional contraction. One of the most profound, life-altering domains where Zen psychology delivers a radical alternative to modern Western paradigms is in our direct, intimate relationship with difficult emotional states. When a wave of intense anxiety or fear rises within our consciousness, our immediate habitual reaction is to enter a state of high-alert internal war. We run away into distractions, we anesthetize the body, or we enter the intellectual theater of the mind, spinning an endless, catastrophic narrative about why we are anxious. The tragedy of this approach is that the narrative script completely feeds the emotional fire. The story generates more anxiety. The anxiety hardens the story, and the emotion becomes a solid, terrifying entity that completely dominates our internal landscape. Zen offers a surgical, counterintuitive maneuver. Drop the script and track the sensation. Zen psychology asserts that an emotion is not an absolute intellectual truth. It is a temporary composite configuration of biological energy, moving through the physical architecture of your body. Anxiety cannot exist as an abstract concept. It requires a localized physiological real estate within your flesh to be perceived. The next time you are ambushed by a heavy wave of anxiety or emotional distress, you must flatly refuse to enter the cinema of the mind. Do not try to analyze the source of the emotion. Do not try to fix your life. Choices do not argue with the thoughts. Instead, turn your entire focus directly down into the physical geography of your body. Scan your body with microscopic precision until you locate the visceral contraction. Look for the tight, suffocating knot directly over your anatomical heart, the hollow, nauseating fluttering in the pit of your stomach, the hot constriction around your throat, or the cold, rigid armoring across your jaw and shoulders. Once you locate the physical coordinates of the emotion, zoom in on it with absolute, non-judgmental curiosity. Investigate the raw properties of the sensation as if you were a scientist discovering a new biological specimen. What are its exact dimensions? Does it have a clear shape, or are its boundaries fluid? Is it heavy, cold, sharp, or vibrating with high-frequency electricity? Once you have mapped its physical architecture, deploy the practice of radical non-resistant inhabitation. Breathe directly into the absolute center of the physical knot, granting it absolute, unconditional permission to exist within your body. Say to that contraction of pain, through the language of pure presence, that it is allowed to be here. As you maintain this steady, unmoving gaze, the trapped energetic charge naturally loses its solid appearance, breaks apart, and dissolves back into the wide space of your true consciousness. Intimate mortality and the metaphor of the brightly burning flame. There is no domain of human existence where modern global culture exhibits more intense denial, avoidance, and terror than in our relationship with the natural processes of aging, physical illness, and our inevitable mortality. We treat death as a catastrophic failure of medical technology, a terrifying clinical enemy to be fought with aggressive resistance, or a horrific taboo topic to be systematically pushed out of polite conversation. We invest massive collective resources into masking the physical signs of aging, desperately trying to preserve an illusion of permanent youth. keeping ourselves in a state of continuous, low-grade panic regarding the fragility of our biological forms. Zen explicitly tears down this heavy wall of denial, inviting the practitioner into a deep, fearless intimacy with the absolute reality of impermanence. In traditional Zen monastic settings, the awareness of mortality is not avoided. It is kept aggressively at the very center of daily life. This practice is not born from a morbid, depressing obsession with decay. It is born from the profound recognition that a clear-eyed, unblinking awareness of death is the ultimate engine for authentic, vibrant living. When we truly realize that this precious human existence will end, and that we do not know when the final transition will arrive, each moment becomes infinitely more valuable, and our desperate grasping after trivial status symbols drops away completely. The Buddha offered a spectacular, transcendent metaphor for this final transition. He stated that if a human being lives their life with absolute awareness, burning brightly like a pure candle from both ends at once, their physical death becomes a magnificent, beautiful event to witness. You will see their life shine brightest at the very end of the road. In their final moments, their entire earthly incarnation concentrates into a single, white-hot flame of pure presence. The physical body drops away like empty packaging, and they dissolve into the formless, timeless ocean of absolute consciousness from which they were never truly separate. They do not die, they simply return home, leaving behind an echo of pristine peace that continues to bless the world long after the flame has vanished. By becoming intimate with the reality that nothing lasts forever, you learn how to live authentically, transforming the aging process from a journey of decay into a magnificent evolution of wisdom and light, relational geography, and the art of leaving the woman at the puddle. The vast majority of our human relational suffering, the chronic conflict, the bitter disappointments, and the sudden collapses of our partnership stems from the fact that we rarely look at the actual living human beings who stand directly before us. Instead, the ego constructs a highly complex, rigid mental script about who the other person is, how they should behave, what they must deliver to guarantee our happiness, and how their past faults define their current identity. We view our partners, our children, and our friends through a dense, distorted filter of accumulated grievances, future anxieties, and self-centered expectations. We are not in a relationship with a real person, we are in a relationship with a conceptual ghost of our own making. To illustrate the absolute necessity of letting go of past historical weight within relationships, Zen masters frequently recount the classic story of the two monks traveling together on a deeply muddy forest road after a torrential rainstorm. As they walked, they encountered a beautiful young woman dressed in an exquisite silk kimono, standing helplessly at the edge of a massive, deep puddle of mud, unable to cross without completely ruining her clothes. Without a single word of hesitation, the elder monk stepped forward, physically picked the woman up into his arms, carried her safely across the deep mud, and set her down gently on the dry grass on the other side. The woman offered a polite bow of gratitude, and the two monks continued their journey in absolute silence. 5 long hours passed as they walked deeper into the forest, the silence growing increasingly heavy and tense. Finally, the younger monk, completely unable to contain his internal fury any longer, burst out. As celibate monks, we are explicitly forbidden from touching women, especially beautiful young ones. Why on earth did you do that? You violated our sacred vows. The elder monk stopped walking, looked at his young companion with a gaze of profound, gentle compassion, and replied, "My dear brother, I left that woman by the puddle 5 long hours ago. Tell me, why exactly are you still carrying her inside your head?" This humorous, razor-sharp story exposes the exact mechanism of how we torture ourselves within our relationships. Something occurs, a partner makes a thoughtless, cutting remark, a friend forgets a significant arrangement, or a colleague executes a minor betrayal. The actual physical event lasts for a few fleeting seconds or minutes, but our untrained mind refuses to leave the event at the puddle. We pick it up, carry it into our internal world, and transport it across hours, days, weeks, and sometimes decades. We replay the scene thousands of times, staging elaborate internal arguments, building massive legal cases for how we have been wronged, completely blinding ourselves to the reality of the life that is happening right now. Zen cuts the ropes of this exhausting burden. It commands you to leave the woman at the puddle, clear the internal field, and meet others with beginner's mind open to new possibilities, rather than filled with old preconceptions. Silencing the internal dialogue and the practice of auditory stripping. When an individual or a problem has occupied your thoughts for an extended duration, the haunting ceases to be purely visual or emotional. It becomes deeply textual. You develop an unconscious, ongoing internal monologue with the phantom. Even when you are entirely alone, your mind is continuously explaining itself to them, defending its lifestyle choices, proving its current success, or seeking their unspoken approval. In Buddhist cognitive science, this verbal proliferation is called papankath, conceptual mapping of reality driven by the ego's projections. This internal dialogue is highly addictive because it allows you to maintain a simulated connection with a conflict or a person without having to face the cold reality of their absence. It keeps the relationship alive as a linguistic construct inside your head. To systematically silence this internal dialogue, you must apply the practice of Vaksankara Nirodha, the deliberate cessation of verbal mental formations. The protocol requires a three-step movement of consciousness. First, execute acoustic identification. The next time you catch your mind engaging in an internal argument or explanation directed toward a person or situation, freeze the frame. Do not focus on the content of what you are saying, focus entirely on the acoustic quality of the voice. Is it rapid? Is it defensive? Where does it reverberate inside your skull? Second, execute semantic stripping. Treat the words exactly like empty sound data. If the mind says that you must prove your worth or correct their perception, do not engage with the ambition. Strip the words of their meaning. Realize that these phrases are merely passing vibrations of cognitive energy, no more significant than the sound of wind rustling through dry leaves or traffic passing on a distant street. Third, return to the primordial gap. Turn your attention away from the words and direct it toward the literal silence that exists before, during, and after every phrase. Every word requires a background of silence to be perceived. Anchor your entire consciousness firmly within that pristine, unmoving gap of silence. When the voice realizes it can no longer provoke an internal response, its momentum collapses, and the dialogue dissolves back into the quiet field of awareness. The dissolution of cellular memory and systemic tissue evacuation. The final and most stubborn defense of any long-term mental fixation is not located in the brain, it is stored within the bioenergetic tissue of the physical organism. In the classical frameworks of the Abhidhamma, these are known as kaya-giganthi, physical knots or cellular contractions left behind by deep emotional impacts. Your nervous system possesses an impeccable memory. It stores the energetic imprint of a trauma, the shock of a sudden betrayal, and the heavy physical pattern of a deep grief long after your conscious intellect has moved on. These cellular knots act as tiny automated radios broadcasting a low-grade frequency of lack, anxiety, or resentment throughout your physical form, frequently triggering spontaneous waves of panic or overthinking without any immediate conscious cause. To permanently clear these cellular imprints, you must execute a deep, meditative sweep of the physical form, utilizing the body as an alchemical furnace. Sit or lie in a position of absolute structural alignment. Close your eyes and allow your awareness to slowly move through the physical landscape of your flesh, from the crown of the head down to the tips of the toes. Look specifically for dense, cold, or highly pressurized bioenergetic knots that feel structurally linked to the history of your anxieties. Once you locate a knot, whether it is a heavy constriction behind the shoulder blades, a cold numbness in the solar plexus, or a tight armoring around the jaw, bring your entire breath baseline directly to that coordinate. Widen your breath. Imagine that each inhalation is introducing a warm, spacious, and highly oxygenated current of pure awareness straight into the center of the cellular knot. As you exhale, do not try to push the tension away or force it to change. Grant the knot absolute, unconditional permission to expand, soften, and unravel at its own organic pace. You are consciously reclaiming your physical form. You are stripping the memory of its physiological real estate, ensuring that every cell, every nerve, and every muscle fiber is returned to its natural state of unblemished, sovereign presence. the horizon of total luminescence and eternal freedom. Having thoroughly dismantled the internal dialogue, cleared the environmental anchors, tracked the somatic contractions, and dissolved the final cellular knots within the flesh, you cross the final absolute threshold of this contemplative masterclass. You enter the experiential reality of Prabhasvarasati, the fundamentally radiant, luminous mind. This is the ultimate unchanging ground of all human consciousness. It is a state of awareness that is inherently brilliant, completely unstained by history, and fundamentally free from the illusions of lack, anxiety, or separation. From this pristine sky of awareness, you look back at the entire landscape of your historical struggle. You see the anxieties, the heartbreaks, the years of obsessive mental loopings, and the intense internal battles not as personal failures or structural flaws, but as the precise sacred alchemical processes required to break the hard shell of your ego. The challenges that refused to leave your mind did not do so out of random psychological cruelty. They stayed because they were under a profound mandate from your own highest intelligence, to remain until you had absolutely no choice, but to discover that your true security, your true worth, and your true peace can never be dependent on any transient form in the universe. They locked you in the fire until you turned into pure gold. Look at the image of your past struggles one final time within the wide, beautiful, and cool space of your sovereign heart. See them clearly, strip them of all historical blame, and grant them absolute, unconditional release. They have completed their work. You have finished your training. The well is clean, the dialogue is silent, the body is open, and the sky of your mind is completely, flawlessly clear. Go forward into your life, resting effortlessly as the vast, luminous awareness that is your eternal birthright. You are permanently, structurally, and absolutely free. Turn off the internal machinery of striving. Lean back into the spacious expanse of the present witness, and simply allow your being to rest in its natural, pristine state of unconditional liberation. The dynamic feedback loop of subconscious proliferation. To further elaborate on the precision of this internal engineering, we must examine the subterranean mechanics of how the mind stream perpetually revitalizes its own phantoms when left unguarded. A thought never enters the conscious mind as an isolated, sterile data point. It behaves like a living, energetic organism that immediately seeks to secure its own survival by establishing a dynamic feedback loop within your biological architecture. The moment a latent memory or an anxious calculation regarding the future arises from the storehouse consciousness, it instantly projects a subtle electrical impulse to the limbic system, which translates this cognitive abstract into an immediate, visceral change in the physical form. This somatic echo usually manifests as a microcontraction, a subtle elevation of the breath baseline, and pachti, imperceptible tightening of the diaphragm, or a sudden thermal drop in the extremities. The conscious ego, continuously scanning the physical form for safety updates, notices this physical alteration and misinterprets the visceral discomfort as absolute historical proof that the external problem is massive, catastrophic, and completely real. The ego declares that if the body is experiencing a physical sensation of threat, then the threat must be imminent and total. To justify this physical contraction, the prefrontal cortex immediately initiates a high-powered narrative program, manufacturing an endless array of catastrophic scenarios, internal arguments, and protective strategies. This narrative proliferation represents the exact structural movement of papanka that we must systematically disrupt. The story generates an additional wave of emotional intensity. The emotion deepens the somatic contraction. The intensified physical knot demands an even more complex narrative to explain its existence. Within a matter of minutes, the individual is completely severed from the objective reality of the present room, trapped inside a self-generating, highly combustible psychological simulator. You are no longer interacting with the world as it is. You are interacting with a highly distorted, terrifying loop of your own internal feedback. To break this loop, the practitioner must relentlessly deploy the scalpel of bare attention, refusing to validate the narrative script and anchoring their entire focus straight into the raw, unpolished physical sensation within the flesh until the energetic wheel runs out of momentum and collapses back into space. The great doubt and the transition through the gateless gate. As the practitioner refines their capacity to remain unentangled from the surface traffic of the intellect, they will inevitably arrive at a profound threshold of consciousness, known in the Zen tradition as the Great Doubt. This is an exceptionally intense psychological territory that frequently manifests during long hours of physical wakefulness or deep meditative sitting. It is not the simple, superficial doubt of the ego questioning its practical choices, but a structural, existential destabilization of your entire conventional reality. The mind looks past the continuous noise of its thoughts and encounters a profound absolute silence that feels completely alien to the ego's identity. The ego, whose entire existence is predicated on continuous movement, definition, and internal narration, experiences this profound silence as a form of impending annihilation. It panics, screaming in the dark about whether anything you are doing actually matters, whether your identity is dissolving into nothingness, and whether this entire contemplative path of acceptance is merely a sophisticated mechanism of psychological suicide. This is the exact coordinate where the separate self feels completely trapped. It has exhausted all its conventional strategies of control. It has realized the absolute futility of overthinking, and yet it refuses to step forward into the spacious void of the unconditioned. It is the predicament of the mosquito attempting to bite the solid iron bull, encountering an absolute resistance that offers nowhere for the teeth to sink in. Zen psychology reveals that this great doubt is not a sign of spiritual failure or psychological breakdown. It is the definitive, necessary passage through the gateless gate. The gate appears closed and terrifying only as long as you attempt to cross it as a solid, separate ego self carrying a heavy sack of historical definitions, expectations, and grievances. The moment you recognize that the ego is an empty, conceptual fiction, that there is no solid entity inside your chest that needs to be preserved or defended, the gate vanishes entirely. You realize that you have never been outside the sanctuary of true freedom. You were simply hypnotized by the performance of your own thoughts. You stop attempting to solve the unsolvable riddle of your identity. You let go of the requirement for absolute certainty, and you step effortlessly into the wide-open, radiant landscape of your true nature as pristine, non-dual awareness, the architecture of absolute compassion and the transpersonal shift. The ultimate stabilization of the liberated mind requires a complete, irreversible breakdown of the ego's self-centered orientation toward its own internal pain. As long as you approach the challenge of your sleeplessness, your anxieties, or your relational heartbreaks through the narrow, constricted framework of personal victimization, asking why this is happening to you, how you can repair your specific broken heart, or what you must do to secure your private peace, you are actively maintaining the very boundaries that generate the suffering in the first place. You are treating your emotional pain as an isolated, historical tragedy that belongs exclusively to your biography. The radical alternative delivered by the Mahayana contemplative tradition is the execution of the transpersonal shift through the practice of Tonglen, the intentional art of sending and taking energy. When you find yourself trapped awake in the deep hours before dawn, with your chest tight with anxiety and your mind spinning through its archives of regret, you must flatly refuse to use mindfulness as a private self-help weapon designed to soothe your individual nervous system. Instead, you stand absolute in your posture, widen the architecture of your lungs, and voluntarily transform your heart into a cosmic alchemical furnace for the collective human condition. As you draw a deep, slow inhalation into your body, look straight into the raw, burning ache of your anxiety. Intentionally imagine that you are breathing in not just your private suffering, but the identical anxiety, the identical loneliness, and the identical heartbreak of every single human being across the planet who is currently awake in the dark, weeping over their choices or trembling at their future. You breathe it in as a thick, dark cloud of collective human grief, pulling it straight into the luminous core of your own true awareness. As you hold the breath for a fleeting second, you recognize that this pain is not uniquely yours. It is the timeless weight of human attachment and cyclic existence passing through your organism. Then, as you exhale slowly and smoothly, you visualize that the diamond-like clarity of your unconditioned presence instantly processes that dark cloud, transmuting it into a brilliant golden light of absolute relief, cooling space, and unconditional peace. You breathe this golden radiance out across the cosmos, directing it like a soothing balm to every lonely bedroom, every silent asylum, and every fractured home across the earth where a human heart is currently caught in the agonizing wheels of obsession. The instant you execute this shift, your private suffering completely loses its capacity to crush you. Your heart is no longer a small, fragile porcelain cup trapped in a tiny domestic drama. It expands into an infinite oceanic cathedral capable of holding the collective grief of the universe without breaking, permanently free from the illusion of separation. The ultimate return to the marketplace with bliss-bestowing hands. Having navigated the entire architecture of the overactive mind, deconstructed the 7 catalysts of karmic fixation, mastered the somatic deconstruction of emotional tissue knots, and crossed the final threshold into the vast sky of pure luminescence, the practitioner enters the absolute terminal coordinate of the path, the ultimate return to ordinary, everyday life. In the classical Zen iconography, this evolution is beautifully mapped out across the traditional 10 ox herding pictures, which depict the sequential stages of the spiritual journey. The earlier pictures display the intense struggle to track, tame, and master the wild ox of the mind through meditation and insight. The 8th and 9th pictures represent the absolute realization of emptiness, where both the ox and the self vanish completely into a pristine circle of total void and non-dual unity. If the path ended at the 9th picture, Zen would be nothing more than a refined strategy of cosmic escapism system designed to help you float permanently in the clouds of mystical detachment, completely separate from the concrete challenges of human society. But the absolute peak of Zen mastery is the 10th picture, titled Entering the Marketplace with Bliss-Bestowing Hands. This final illustration displays a completely ordinary-looking, robust human being walking through a busy city market street, carrying a simple sack of provisions, laughing with the merchants, and drinking wine with the townspeople. There are absolutely no outward signs of spiritual attainment about his person. Wears no monastic robes. He delivers no grandiose philosophical lectures, and he does not present himself as a holy, self-consciously religious saint. He appears completely, beautifully ordinary. Yet in his very presence, an extraordinary, silent transformation occurs within his environment. As he walks through the marketplace, his eyes radiating the quiet, unshakable peace of absolute clarity, the surrounding individuals naturally experience a softening of their own anxieties. He does not disturb a single blade of grass. As he enters the forest, he does not make a single ripple as he enters the water. He has returned to the absolute source of his ordinary life, completely integrated, beautifully whole, and fundamentally free. This is the ultimate invitation of this modern Zen masterclass. You do not practice these advanced protocols of somatic tracking, mental noting, and radical non-striving to become a permanent resident of a meditation cushion or to escape the logistical realities of your adulthood. You practice to completely burn away the illusion of the separate ego, so that you can return to your workplace, your household, and your human relationships as an unshakable monument of pure, radiant presence. You walk back into the marketplace of your life with bliss-bestowing hands, fully capable of managing your finances, raising your children, caring for your parents, and navigating your professional obligations, yet completely delivered from the tyranny of internal suffering. The midnight panic has dissolved. The phantoms have completed their teaching. The sky of your awareness is flawlessly clear, and you are, in this very breath, permanently, structurally, and absolutely free. Go forward into the world, rest effortlessly within the boundless space of the present witness, and live your life with an open, luminous, and unshakable heart.